partners at Puck, John Heilman, and co-founder and CEO of Axios, Jim Vandehei, back with us. Good to have you all. Barbara McQuaid, what do we expect out of this hearing today?
Well, today, Mika, is the hearing for a preliminary injunction. As you reported on Friday, a judge issued a temporary restraining order. That's an order that's given ex parte without giving the defendant an opportunity to respond based on the pleading itself. And the judge there found that there was a substantial likelihood that Harvard would succeed on the merits of its First Amendment claims, its Fifth Amendment claims, and that there would be irreparable harm to individuals here, students who lose their status. And so blocked that order on Friday. Today is the opportunity for the defense to be heard, to decide whether this injunction should stay in place for a more permanent basis. A temporary restraining order by its terms is only good for 14 days, and it contemplates that there would be shortly thereafter a hearing like the one that we'll see today that would leave that stay in place while the case works its way through the courts. So I don't imagine the defense has much more to say that is not already publicly known, but the judge will hear from the defendant and decide whether to lift this stay or keep it in place while the litigation ensues.
You know, Jim Vandehei, this is this lawsuit, this fight between Donald Trump and Harvard University, really, I mean, it really defines the polarized world we live in right now, because both sides are winning politically on this. It's obviously extraordinarily difficult for Harvard, that faces some real challenges, real concerns about R&D. But at the same time, the New York Times has a story today talking about how this fight with Donald Trump has actually healed a fractured campus and everybody's coming together on Harvard. At the same time, Donald Trump obviously doing well with his base when he talks about anti-Semitism on Harvard, political biases on Harvard, the left wing getting more powerful there. Sort through this politically for us, if you will.
I mean, I think you got it right in terms of, you know, what the base likes about the fight. What doesn't make sense, and there's just so many contradictions with the policies of this White House, is if you just step way back, the biggest two topics are: can we defeat China over the next 10 to 20 years or keep them from becoming a superpower with greater reach than the U.S.? And can we win this sort of race around AI, which we talked about yesterday? To do both of those, you need the best and brightest people coming to the United States and helping build these technologies, help strengthen the U.S. economy, help make these academic institutions better and brighter. We just have a lot fewer people than China. So when you start to ban, not just at Harvard, there's talk of doing this with Chinese students across the board, talk about doing this at other universities. This is a flip for Trump himself, who a year ago said, hey, we want the best and brightest. Maybe if you come here and you have a certain talent set, you should be instantly made a U.S. citizen. So it's even a shift for him. And I think that gets lost in all of this. And I think there's this danger for Trump right now. It's really interesting. You know, we've been monitoring MAGA media very closely, and there's obviously still a ton of loyalty. But there's starting to be a break. We saw it last night over AI. You saw Steve Bannon, you saw Charlie Kirk and some others saying, hey, we agree with what Axios wrote and what the Morning Joe talked about yesterday, that there could be this job apocalypse that the administration is not paying enough attention to. That's a little bit of a break. You've seen Ben Shapiro on his show say, whoa, all of these deals that seem to be helping out the Trump family and helping Trump, but aren't doing anything to help the working class, that could be really problematic for the Republican Party in 2026 and 2028. And so I think these fights that he's picking, while they might feel good and they might satisfy some kind of itch that a part of the base has had, are starting to unnerve even parts of his base. And I would keep a close eye on that. I don't think MAGA is going to split from Trump, but there's real signs that there's deep unease that this could hurt the party, all of this in totality, running into 2026. And for Trump, God forbid, if he has Democrats running the House, it's going to be investigation, subpoena for 2 years. And he's giving them a lot to work with.
Well, and you also have Mark Levin very concerned about Qatar, very concerned about Saudi Arabia, very concerned especially about a deal with Iran. So you're right. There is some discontent that's rising in the MAGA world. Jonathan Lemire, though, I will tell you, for people who are not political, who are just looking at America's standing in the world, deep concerns and real hopes that this crisis between the White House and the Harvard gets resolved quickly, because, as Jim Vandehei said, in our fight against China to stay ahead on AI, to stay ahead on technology, to stay ahead on weapons technology, you name it. You talk about our medical research, whether you're talking about breakthroughs in Parkinson's, breakthroughs in Alzheimer's, breakthrough in cancer, in breast cancer, you name it. That is damaged when funding is taken away from the best and the brightest. And when we tell the best and the brightest in the world, don't come here, we're closed for business, stay in China, help China beat America, go to the EU, help European countries get a leg up on America in the coming years. I mean, this is not stagnant. It's always moving. The United States is always, we're either moving ahead or we're falling behind. We've been moving ahead for since World War II because of R&D at from our best and brightest universities. This is the real concern for people who are looking at it as far as national security issues go. They want this resolved.
Yeah, and it's been a 1-2 punch from the Trump administration. First, slashing federal funding for research and grants, both in government and elsewhere, and now telling these institutions they can't draw the students, the very researchers who would do the work with that money. So there is a lot of concern and growing rapidly about this. And John Heilman, I mean, I think it's a twin issue. It's the high level, like Joe just outlined, but also, as Jim said, the fact that there is now a sense among some in MAGA world, like, well, why is your focus on getting a jet from Qatar and not lowering prices? Like, what actually have you done here? And then they look at this piece of legislation that's passed the House, that's Trump's signature item, and it's something that, again, with a careful inspection, seems to really help the rich and not a lot of the people who actually put Donald Trump back in office.
Right, Jonathan. And there's an additional irony or an inconsistency on the Harvard thing to the one that Jim was talking about, which is that the relatively new president of Harvard, Alan Garber, is someone who actually agrees with many conservative critics of elite institutions that they had let themselves be overrun by anti-Semitism. He was someone who was a reformer and had come in explicitly saying, yeah, this troubles me. We need to change our culture at Harvard. And because the Trump administration, driven by President Trump, has been so extreme in how it's dealt with Harvard and made demands that no university could ever accept, that it kind of put someone who would potentially have been a partner of the Trump administration in back on its heels and pushed it into a corner. And you have a lot of people even people who have been very critical of Harvard, who look at this and go, hey, I think this is going a little bit too far. And I think that gets at this larger thing. Maggie Haberman has a very good piece in the New York Times about how this is an illustration of a thematic in this new administration, which is that Donald Trump, his sense of grievance and the way in which he sees conflict as a zero-sum game drives a lot of self-defeating and politically problematic course of action. This is one of them. The attacks on the law firms, right? So if you fight back against Trump, he will fight you until there's no more fight to fight. He goes all the way to the extreme. He has done this across the board, essentially, whether it's Miles Taylor or Chris Krebs or anybody else. If they push back against Trump, it is their fault, and he will then punish them and will say what he said about Harvard yesterday, which is, I want to help these guys. They're just creating this problem for themselves. And of course, that's not true, but it's also, as I say, and as Jim was pointing out, it can be politically self-defeating because it takes his eye off the ball on what is really the political calculus that got him back into the White House, which is prices, economy, turning all that stuff around. Trump seems really distracted by a lot of personal vendettas here and not focused on what his base and what all American or all Republican voters really want.
And meanwhile, the president continues